Shall we just start?
I think we're already there. We're already started.
Well, we can start maybe by talking about how, why we're talking right now.
That's okay. Yes.
And it was you describing silence that actually perked my interest. No, it was before that. It was, you started talking about practice and how, your own practice with music.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about how easily or transferable different kinds of practices are in relation to research. Maybe we're talking about something else. Mm-hmm. Talking about playing the bass, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about something before that I think I need to just refresh, because there was something
I told you I was going to karate.
Yes, that's the thing. That's where it started. It started at karate. Exactly.
Started with karate.
How did that go, by the way?
It's tomorrow night.
It's tomorrow night. Ooh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm going to the dojo tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And it's a practice that I've done for over 30 years.
Yeah.
So it's part of my body, basically.
Yes.
And you mentioned that you've been playing music for...
I played the bass for around...
almost 25.
25-ish kind of years.
Yeah.
And that's also part of my body. But it's always been something that I was doing adjacent to my academic life until a certain point where I started working a lot with sound and music and other things. Yeah.
But what is it about keeping at something like playing music? Are there parts of your development, of your refinement, of your skills in music that you've transferred into your own research practice, or if you have an art practice? I'm not sure.
I think also that's some of the stuff that we talked about, that I play less and less music, and I'm not particularly happy about that. But it's something that is always a baseline in terms of, well, pun intended, as a baseline to how much like you've still got it in your body, right? And when I was younger, I would always kind of shift between doing more academic work, and then I felt, I'm doing too little music, I should play some more, and then I started playing some more. Mm-hmm. But then at a certain point in time, when I got a family and kids, you don't have that much time to kind of shift around too much. Mm-hmm. So I think but I've been playing in this band for like almost 25 years, where we basically put on tennis clothes and play cover music, which is super fun. And it's like just a totally different kind of situation than when you're standing in front of an audience lecturing, like just putting on tennis clothes and just playing music. Everybody likes you and sings along. It's really amazing. So I've
What's
been doing
the name
that.
of your band again?
It's called Tennis.
Oh, tennis.
Tennis, yeah. So that's why we put on the tennis clothes and all. And then I've been playing some other stuff, like some what I call family-friendly avant-garde music, more experimental stuff. So I've been at two ends of the spectrum, very popular, just to make people dance, and very weird, just to make people feel differently.
Has it always been about other people, or is there other things that come into?
That depends a bit on what, like the tennis has been very much about audience, like how do you create the best experience for the audience. The other stuff has been more about how do you challenge yourself as a musician, and how do you create stuff that hasn't been heard before, which I think, but also has been about, and how do you transfer that into, because that's what happens when you play, when you're on a stage, when you start playing, something happens that could not happen regardless of that particular space and time, right? That's the thing about.
What is it that happens?
Well, it's the event, right? That's like it's the things come together, and suddenly there's an energy that you do not get from anywhere else, but being on stage, that kind of feeds into the way that you play. So sometimes I feel that I'm able to play stuff on the stage that I couldn't play anywhere else, and you can transfer that energy into the playing. So that's so it's a question of energy, I think, in that sense. And speaking of energy, isn't it really interesting how we need to kind of look for what we're trying to find the energetic starting point for our previous conversation and try to transfer it into this moment, so we can kind of, there was something interesting. What was it? I don't remember. What was it? Okay. And then we can start talking about it, yeah.
Yeah, there is something, it's interesting that you honed in on that word energy, because, I mean, in this podcast, I've spoken a lot about cultivation of chi, and that's a form of energy.
Yeah.
And then there's also other things like in self-cultivation, you know, there's an energy that you kind of, that drives you. I mean, it's also an attitude that you want to develop yourself in some way that requires like a degree of discomfort and other elements. But I guess, yeah, it's interesting that now I think people are becoming, or at least the people I've been speaking to, are becoming a bit more aware about what is that energy that we want to really transfer, that we get meaning from. Because so often, I mean, not just in design, but you often have existential doubts about your place in the world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you relate to that in your frame?
So I have kind of at least a double or triple way of relating. I've been doing quite a lot of work on energy and energetic fields and fielding with a good
Is
colleague.
that with a philosophical foundation?
It's a philosophical foundation.
Okay, would you mind explaining it?
I'll see if I can. It's been a while since I actually
Dumbed it down.
But okay, let's. So I have a really good friend and colleague, Christoph Brunner, who is at Rotterdam University, but also in Montreal. And we've been working on a book project for 15 years now, maybe. No, 12. But something along the lines of that. We thought we would write a book about this French philosopher of technology called Gilbert Simondon, because we wrote an article about some of his work called Fields of Transduction. And basically, what he's like he did his writing in the 50s and 60s, and he wrote a book called On the Mode of Existence of Technical Objects, and he also wrote a huge volume that was translated into English a couple of years ago, called Individuation in the Light of the Notions of Form, Potential, and Information. So that's a lot of things to say. That he's like, but he's like, so. But the thing I wanted to say is that he's really concerned with how things change, what makes change possible, and develops this concept of metastability.
Sorry, was that metastability?
Metastability, yeah. And he has this amazing article where he talks about extending knowledge from physics and chemistry into the social and psychic domains. And he says that what is needed to effectuate this is to deploy the notion of energy. He talks about energy as that which is necessary to create changes in metastable systems.
Makes sense.
And he has this word that he talks about something called transduction, which basically is when something new, when individuation happens, when something qualitatively new emerges from a particular kind of encounter, when a system develops into something qualitatively different. So don't shoot me too much for not being able to fully articulate the philosophy like of Simondon in terms of, but I think he's an interesting philosopher, both when it comes to design, well, in particular when it comes to design, because really he's about change, right? How do you change things? What is necessary for things to change, and how do you do that? And what happens when things change? It kind of reminds me a bit, because I'm also reading Octavia Butler right now. The whole where basically it's all about, you know, that God is change, this Earthseed community in a rather dystopian future, but that's a tangent line. But this idea about change, this process, philosophical foundation, that it's really not about entities, it's about transformation, it's about ontogenesis is what he calls. Rather than ontology, it's about ontogenesis. And energy is a key concept, because energy is what makes change possible, what effectuates change in a sense.
Did he speak about his motivation behind thinking about why he wants to change, why induce change?
Well, I think
everything is like, change is already naturally occurring.
Yeah, but I think that's the point. Like, I don't think necessarily he wants to induce change. He's trying to understand how change is primary like movement is primary to stasis, something like that. It's really about change. It's about things that are always becoming, right? So it's also a precursor to more like post-structuralist thinking, like the work of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. They draw a lot on Simondon in articulating that idea as well.
I see.
And then the energy part.
So
Yeah.
it's also about understanding change, like understanding how it happens. Is that what you're saying?
It's about understanding change, and it's about understanding that change
And
is,
working with it, or
and
just simply sort of understanding how things, like seeing how things are emerging because of certain factors being put into place. Sorry, I know I'm like really like
no,
probably
that's fine. That's
massacring.
fine. No, but I think it's like I'm not sure I can answer exactly that, but what I think
Maybe you can
is
give an example of how you've like maybe, you know, whether it's direct or indirect in the way that, you know, you and your colleague have been experimenting with it or
so we
talking about it.
yeah we've been trying to cultivate more conceptually this idea about energy in relation to energy humanities,
Mm.
well, like environmental humanities, because we think it was interesting to kind of take the notion of energy, which in that particular instantiation is very much about fossil fuel and carbon cultures, and say that that's really important, but energy is also a lot of other things. And maybe we can open up a transformative potential of our present by understanding the way in which energy is so pervasive, both aesthetically, perceptually, but also in very important discussions around carbon cultures and fossil futures and all those things.
Did you ever also, have you also reflected on how energy, I mean, how the body has energy?
Yes, but I think that's that's the interesting thing, because we've been looking at it from like from a philosophical angle, and also analyzing different kinds of artworks that we believe more or less exemplify energetic transduction in an interesting way. But I think absolutely, like it's something that is it's necessarily about different kinds of bodies, and also our own bodies, but also a lot of other kinds of bodies.
Like also non-human bodies
Also
and
non-human
plants
bodies.
and
Yeah.
water and
Yeah, and without again trying to sound too banal, but that's of course what connects everything, right? It is energy in that sense, and it's something that is felt also, and that's why I think it relates a lot to what I'm normally doing, which is like working with affect and stuff, because affect in the way I understand it is really about the capacity to change, or like as Spinoza, he talks about affect as a change in the capacitation of the body, where positive affect is what allows you to become affected and affect, and negative affect is where you are not able to affect and cannot become affected. So there's an active and passive side to it, and positive and negative is maybe just a bit too like it's a mix. It's
like
more
yin yang.
complicated, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think all of that is felt, right? It's felt. It's bodily felt transitions, and that feltness is an energetic transfer, I would say, and that energetic transfer is across bodies: human, non-human, more than human, part human, and I think a lot of stuff, a lot of things change in our conception of, for instance, design when we take that approach, because then it's not a question of whether or not we should change or not. It's a question of that we will always already be designing into something that is already changing, right?
yes.
So, and that changes how we navigate that space.
Is that not the dominant narrative? Don't people, I mean, isn't this already accepted in HCI that change is inevitable, that it's like the one constant factor of the world that we live in and what we design for?
I think to a certain extent, maybe yes, but I think also we have other competing narratives around, like creating an environment where we can test things that is change-free. Like, something like I would say,
that's right.
I don't think it's super dominant
we
necessarily.
understand conceptually, but in practice,
in
people
practice,
sort of forget about it.
Yeah, and I think like we also and I think change is not like, again, if you read Octavia Butler, you will see that even though change is kind of the god, it's not necessarily change for the better. Like, I think we're living in a time right now where we thought that things that were kind of obtained to a certain level are suddenly just changing into, abortion rights in the States, for example, stuff like that. So it's not that change is like always positive. It's just what is there, right?
That I think also depends on how far, like when you zoom in, because then you have time, of course, and when you put time into the mix,
Yeah.
then you can say that was really bad, like when we zoom in there. But then like when we zoom out a bit, we're like, oh, yeah, that was a pretty good period, you know.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. Yes, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's something very liberating about the fact that things can change, but we can also see
Yes.
that there's something really that things need to be maintained in order not to revert to a certain state that is maybe less desirable for from some points of view at least. That was a very weird thing of saying, way of saying that it's not just that change is good and will always result in something that's better. I think that's what design is always about. Design, as you say, and that is true, that design is always about changing. It's always about, like Herbert Simon saying, changing from existing to the preferred or whatever like situation. But that's just that's really difficult when everything is already changing in the first place, right?
I think what comes up for me when you say that is I reflect on things like the climate crisis, where as designers you're talking about and you're advocating for dramatic change. You need paradigm shifts using this kind of language, but then the actual speed of change is so incremental.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of learning, behavior change, all of these things, if we really respect growth, if we really respect the rate of change of nature, then we have to somehow work with that. But then at the same time, I mean, like, it's like we're working with the speed of change, you know, and then we're also trying to instill this criticality, like, if this is the point, like, you know, you've got, I don't know, must be hundreds of documentaries now that are talking about how now is the time we need to change. Now is the time, you know, every year there's a new documentary that's oh yeah, let's give up on the land. It's the oceans. Like if we fix the oceans now, you know, how do we, like for me, I don't know, that just came up for me when you're talking about like this inevitable change and dealing with these multiple timelines and multiple temporalities. I guess, is it about letting go of this lifetime? I mean, it might be a bit spiritual, but it's not supposed to be. It's like from a very practical perspective and a pragmatic thing, you know?
But I think it's also fine to be spiritual. I think Simondon, he talks about spirituality a lot.
Right.
He talks about spirituality in relation to affectivity and emotivity. And he also talks about it in relation to technical systems and technicities. So I think that's not. I think that's perfectly fine, and I think that's also related to the energetic in a lot of ways. But the interesting thing, when you were talking, I was beginning to think about what are the kinds of change. Like you talk about behavioral change. We can talk about environmental change. Like there are many different ways of talking about, and many different things that are changing at different rates and with different temporalities at different speeds. So what Deleuze also talks about in relation to Spinoza is that he develops this idea about ethology, and ethology based on von Uexküll, where he basically talks about this like speed and slowness, like the different a relational approach to understanding different species by what they can become affected by and what speeds they move by and what distribution they have in space and how they register perceptually. And that is true. Like we have all these process lines that are intersecting, and we also have things that are part of other things. So that's like a diagrammatic thinking where you have one object becomes the entire world for another object. And, you know, so yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening and a lot of temporalities. And suddenly you see things that happen that even though you were looking at this kind of steady incremental line of change that ruptures
Suddenly,
everything. Yeah. So I think, again, it's not something that explains a lot of things, but it problematizes a lot of things. And I think it problematizes a lot of things in a quite generative way, because if you think about that, that is the situation that you're designing into. It's already quite complicated when you start. And I think that's not a bad starting point. I think that's okay. I think that's what design should always take as a starting point. That is, it's complicated.
yeah.
And I think like trying to revert to simplistic solutions will always result in more complication.
Yes. I do agree with what you're saying. I guess what comes up for me when you say that is that maybe it's not about simplistic solutions, but it is, in a way, at the beginning of the process, returning to a simplicity of the relationship
Yeah.
and really taking time to develop that understanding of how things are relationally interacting with each other.
Sure, and you can't really map everything out that is happening, right? So
Well,
you
it's
need to
probably
be
not
selective.
always all relevant. Like there's
Exactly,
things
yeah,
that
you
are
need
like,
to make a
sort of
selection.
foreground,
Sure.
background.
Yeah. But you need to be attentive to what happens when you make a move, a design move, right? And what kinds of things arise from that, right? And I think like when we're working, we're teaching design to our students, it's not about, well, okay, some years ago, because also we come from a Scandinavian tradition with a lot of participatory design and a lot of ethnographically inspired design work, you would always have that you need to go out into the actual situation and practice and get to know what's happening before you start designing.
Yeah,
We've kind of moved a bit away from that
I think so.
because you can never know everything in any case, and rather than exhausting a design space, you need to start making your own design moves in that space, and then you need to be attentive to what happens when you do that. And I think that to me is what a relational approach to designing would entail.
I mean, it sounds. I just had an image of contact improv.
Okay, yeah.
Where we're dancing with nature,
Yeah.
very slowly,
Yeah.
and proposing different positions from our side, and then just noticing what our partner does.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear more about how you may or may not have applied this into the work that you did with silence.
Yeah, but I think that exactly the things that you were saying there would made me think that okay, now is the time where we can move into talking about those works, because they were about noticing and attunement, but also about decentering the human in the design process by opening up the pre-verbal or non-verbal engagement with the environment. And we did that in a series of workshops. When I say we, it's a group of design researchers, Kia Hög, Vasily Kitsagnaki, Claudia Núñez Pacheco, Anna Stoll, and Pedro Sanchez. And we wanted to meet to explore how we could attune to a particular site, which in the first instance was a forest outside of Stockholm. And we were reading a lot of stuff about attunement, like both from affect studies and from developmental psychology. Daniel Stern talks about it, Erin Manning talks about it in relation to the more than human. And I think attunement is a nice concept for being attentive to the relationality in a particular site. So we wanted to develop practices of attuning that would allow us to think, feel differently in relation to the design process. So we went into the forest, and then we had basically prepared all sorts of things, body maps, like from a soma design perspective, because we wanted, of course, also activate the ecosome aesthetic. But then we had also from this professor, Barbara Formis, heard that she did these silence workshops where people didn't speak for many hours, and we thought, okay, let's try that. So we went out there, and at some point we decided to just be silent. And then a lot of stuff happened, because that was different from our normal academic engagements. We're at a conference, right? Interestingly, the Kai Chi from the calligraphic opening, and that's about energy, but the conference energy is very much composed of people talking and saying things with more or less authority and all these things. So we wanted to really question a bit that way of engaging with the world. So we were silent for 4 hours, where we did all sorts of explorations. We individually explored, we came together to do things. We ended up burning the body maps. We did all sorts of, and then we came back to speaking at a point, and thought, wow, okay, something actually happened here that doesn't normally happen. We've suddenly felt differently than we did, and we felt a deeper engagement, but not only with the environment, also socially, because that's what happened when we started. We thought we could like attune more to nature or whatever, but in fact we started attuning just as much to each other's movement in that particular space, and it also resulted in people actually just sitting and meditating themselves, like tuning into themselves. So there was a lot of attunement across what I would call three ecologies, like Felix Guattari talks about the three ecologies: environmental, social, and the mental. So we started discussing that, and then we did another workshop where we did it again, and another one where we also cooked in silence, and another one. And now we have written a paper about silence as a method of estrangement in design, as a method for decentering, and as a way of attuning. And I think I told you that we wrote that with some vignettes from our experiences and what happened to our thinking, and what we certainly, what is the kind of boundary work that we think is interesting to look at when you want to work with it in design. But we didn't think it was like, we didn't feel it was there. But now we'll be presenting it in the DIS conference. And whenever I talk to people, as I talk to you, whenever I say silence, everybody says, "Oh yeah, yes, actually yes," because it is quite simple, but also very powerful. And I know Kia already tried it out in some methods with some different stakeholders, and it actually works in different ways, right? And yeah, so that's just yeah. It feels interesting to talk about silence in a podcast, right? And then we should just
we could do a whole season of talking about silences.
Yeah.
I mean, because one thing actually, because the silence, I guess, did people just stop speaking at one point and nobody started talking until 2 hours later or something?
The thing in the paper we kind of develop, like we present different ways. But I think it's very important to have a strategy for landing. And when we did collectively decide that this is the time when we stop talking,
right.
But it wasn't somebody said now we stop talking. It was more like, okay, now it felt like, okay, we don't talk. Okay, great.
Okay.
And when we came back, it was also the same. It was rather a fluid transition sometimes. Yeah. And interestingly, a lot of us reported in our vignettes that we felt that we were done,
right,
without having any things that you needed to be done with. Everybody felt that, okay, we're done. Like, yeah.
I just thought it would be a really interesting methodology for dating apps to propose for their customers, because it's interesting. Like, coming from, I've been practicing Qigong for a little bit of time, and I was just so shocked at when I was first coming in contact with this practice, where you essentially you're told to give up. You're told to set your body into an alignment and then step back, and pay attention and listen and attune to the vacuity.
Yeah.
And what emerges from the space without any expectation.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you're just like, what the hell does that mean? But I mean, when you're in the practice, it really makes a lot of sense, because it's happening in your body, so you're internally observing yourself, and that's part of the training as well. But I think that what strikes me as so wonderful is your exploration in a group setting. And I'm just curious, like, is there like a performative aspect as well that sort of like comes in and out of it, and a ritualistic, I mean, you already mentioned like, dropping in, dropping out, like that seems to have some sort of ritual element in it as well.
I think that's we have developed a way of doing that over the course of these workshops, of course, which is based on our knowledge now of each other's ways of moving in to and out of these kinds of events. So that's something. So I think we talk about it as a kind of a different, as I said, different kinds of boundary work, as a kind of a spatial boundary work, as a temporal boundary work, and you need to kind of be aware of that. And speaking of performativity, we tried numerous times when that didn't work, like when there was somebody who was very playful and the others were in a totally different place, and even afterwards felt a bit let down, or
like a bit rejected, maybe.
Rejected, exactly. That's the right word. And then at other times it came together and everything. Like, so there was all of these things were happening.
So people, there was like invitations.
There was invitations and there were unmet invitations as well, and disappointment. There was a lot going
all
on
happening
there.
in silence.
All happening in silence.
And
yeah.
so mentally, though, were you also guided in some way, or did you make any decisions about where to place your mind, or how? Any type of, I mean, there's this playfulness that's happening, but is there any type of, was there smiling? Was there eye contact?
Yes, we had a lot of that.
Was there physical contact?
Yeah, and we didn't shy away from other persons. It's not that, and we, I think, also occasionally said hi to bypassers, not to seem too strange.
Okay, so maybe was that like in all of the workshops, or maybe the earlier ones?
It was in the earlier ones. We
Right.
were more isolated, I think, actually, in the last couple of workshops. And in the last workshop, we also started designing. Like we had brought materials.
Yeah.
We started doing something together. And
Interesting.
That was where we were kind of moving all along, like trying to explore it as a materiality, silence as a materiality in design, but also what that does to the way that you can make together and unmake together. But I think like. So now I'm just making a point here, right? 10 seconds of silence is a long silence in a conversation, right? And we even tried we were sitting around the table at the bar the other night to do 5 minutes silence, and it just was super awkward after.
Well, I mean, I was quite enjoying it.
Yeah.
But I know that, like, for Michelle and Bucky, who are probably even less accustomed to silence as us, silence for most people is very unusual, and there's a reason why people say that the people who you're closest to is the ones who you can just be in silence with, because there is a degree of like when you're in silence, it means you kind of like you kind of give up on impressing the other person, right? Like that's a very blanket statement, but in a way, it's like, oh, I don't have to think of anything interesting to say. I can just be there.
Yeah, I think
it's cultural as well.
I think it's cultural as well. I think two things that are like maybe I think we also discussed in the paper, and we've also talked about that silence is not, again, it's not always like a positive thing, right? It's the silencing. And it's like there's a lot of like political, sociocultural complications around it. So it's not to say that now we should all just
be silent.
I think we need to be not so silent these days in many ways.
I think it's too extreme to say that.
Yeah, that might be the case.
I mean, because it's very like, oh, we have this great idea, like let's just roll with it. But of course, it's more nuanced than that. You know?
Absolutely, yeah. I was thinking more in the greater scheme of things. There's a lot of like,
I mean, it can be interpreted as like, okay, the silent, like we should all be silent. What are you trying to say?
Yeah. So I think that's like silence can also be a thing that has a lot to do with power and all that. So I think like it's not that silence is just a magical like thing that will now create amazing equal design spaces, whatever. But it's something that has worked.
It's also empowering, though.
It's also empowering, sure. Yeah.
I mean, but I think look at the monks,
as we talked about, it is something that is, but it's not inherently either.
It's not inherently either,
right? So it's something, and it doesn't lead to only happy experiences. We had a lot of unmet expectations, disappointments, other things that we also reflect on and talk about. But we also allowed ourselves to be in a space where that was the case and not to shy away from it, but use it as a kind of leverage to kind of, strengthen the collaboration, right? So I think that's one thing. And then I think, to me at least, because also I'm working a lot with sound and have worked a lot with interactive sound design, and also worked a lot with methods from sound studies that involve developing different kinds of listening methodologies. And I think that was one of the things that was activated most strongly when I was silent. It was like suddenly tuning your ears into like the environment in a different way and listening. And I was actually today in this morning out on a trip where the and I was alone, so I didn't talk to anybody. And it's amazing. Like there were these frogs at the temple. There were these birds that I've never heard these birds before. But like this thing about listening, both outwards, but also listening to yourself and having time to listen to. I think that's like it's not something that we often create that much space for in academia. And I have to say, we did in my research group many times we tried to set up these breathing meditations where we would just come together in the research group once a week for 10 minutes and just do a breathing meditation. And it only worked for the first 3-4 times, and after that, I think most people
I'm too busy for this.
would rather answer emails. Exactly, and I think we're shooting ourselves a bit in the foot with that, and I think that's because we are also like again in the spirit of a conference setting, we're also bodies, and with particular needs, and sometimes that need is to not listen and to not speak and to not sit with the computer and so I think we're sometimes we should be better at opening up different kinds of ways of being in these spaces, and we tried to do that a bit with one workshop on body politics where we had also different bodily exercises that would activate the participants differently, and it was amazing to have that space also at a conference like this.
Yes, I'm just thinking about now, now that we're talking about strategies for injecting silence into various design processes and other ways of engaging. Like, I think as you said, I was just thinking of like when you meditate and if you do close your eyes, then when you open your eyes, the color, the vibrancy of the world is just so much more alive, and that only comes because of the contrast. And if we never have that contrast, or as designers and researchers at a conference, if you've never taken time to notice what that's like, then it's going to be really hard to understand what balance means, to even respond in a really in a deep way to any of the issues that you really want to talk about.
I think that I like that a lot, the notion of like the contrast.
You have to understand. It's not a duality. It's that you simply understand that like
it's a continuum.
Yeah. And one bleeds into the other. And even in silence, as there's so much going on, and in space, it's not empty. I think that understanding comes when you reflect more, when you take time to create that space. I think.
And I think you can develop, as you say, strategies and tactics for doing so, right? And I think that's
because even when we speak to each other, like now we're talking to each other and looking at each other, but I've done workshops where people are silent and making eye contact for extended time and reflecting on different things, and it's really hard to just look at someone. I mean, there's an artist who did an art installation for at the MoMA, Marina Abramovic. The artist is present, and it is really confronting to make eye contact with people without sound. You're relating to them in a completely different way. You're basically staring into their soul.
And that can be very difficult for many people, also like for neurodivergent.
Totally, exactly. So there are different ways of, sort of approaching with silence, and just simply also making people aware. And I really liked what you said about one important aspect was to not shy away, because I think people get to that edge and they're like, no thanks.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how do you think this silence work will develop? I mean, how do you see this as do you have your own practice, personal practice?
I don't know, but
when it's connected with work, you're kind of like, I'm open to it.
No, but I think that I really like. Okay, so of course in music, there's a long history of silence with John Cage's works, as you know, like, but we're rarely silent when we play music. So it's a different kind of energy, right? It's a different kind of energization and activation that happens when you are performing in that way. But I really like some of the best memories I have from the past years of actually going to conferences has been the day up to the conference. That's not entirely true because I love the conferences as well, but just going for a walk without knowing exactly where to go, so totally on your own, and I think I'm beginning to find condensated space for doing that in my everyday life. But if you have 3 kids and one with special needs, who by the way is nonverbal, so we need also to talk about voices in relation to silence. That's a totally well. That will be for the next kind of next kind of talk. But yeah, but there's not a lot of silence in a. So I think like it is a question of cultivating, and I think also in the paper we talk about, and that's a lot in the silence literature. There's a lot about the silence without, but also the silence within. How do you develop different kinds of practices for noticing yourself and balancing, as you say, your own attunements in the world. And I think what I'm trying to say is that I really want to. I want to be more. I really want to be more silent, I should. And I think I have a good chance of doing it. And I don't think it has to be. But I would just like to have it be part of my work time, because I think it's something that is overlooked as a way of actually.
I mean, that's really something. I really think that would be that should be something that we advocate for, because it is. I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I did hear that at I must have been really young when I heard this, because I don't remember much about it, just the essence that people who are working in companies, and I even somehow I have this memory of it being in Japan, that to not bother, the company doesn't like bother the employees when they're just sitting there sort of thinking, because thinking is part of their work. So they're still busy, even though they're not like active. And I mean, thinking is one thing, but I'm not even trying to justify silence by I'm taking time to think. It's like we just want to be silent. Like silence inside really means observing what the space holds.
Yeah.
So it's not about reflecting, thinking. It's not about activity. It's about really like quietude.
Yeah. Like we've got a couple of shut up and write sessions at my home university, but that's about it, right? And we're not.
But
really
shut up
good.
And write. You're writing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're not very good at it. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, this conversation has been really interesting. I am just curious about what do you think the opportunities are for like which areas do you think this would be useful, or do you think it's like relevant to everything because it is really a part of innovation? Like, I mean, when you think about it, like I just did like my presentation was on rest, and I basically said in the paper that like all of like what manifests everything that is manifested comes from the passive and the active, the rest and the activity. They're interwoven with each other. It's like one process, and you're only able to be wakeful because you have properly rested.
Yeah.
And I mean, I see that like that's all context.
Yeah, I think that's true, and that interestingly opened up towards the political dimensions of also like speaker-listener relations as is a big thing. So, like this passive active, which is also part of the Spinozist accounts of affect. It's always like that kind of not dichotomy, but duality within a continuum, and that kind of So I think, and if I don't know where this is like, we have been purposefully not trying to predetermine what this should be. For, which I think is like a really both a privilege and a luxury, but also a necessity in relation to this kind of research.
It just makes methodological sense, though, to approach it from this position.
And somehow that means that we ended up in a place where we have not been before.
Oh. Perfect timing.
It's my dad's birthday today. I set a timer so I can call him and wish
Wonderful.
him. So maybe that's
That's a good place to end, though. And I mean, this was a great conversation.
Thanks so much for facilitating.
Thank you so much. I hope we can talk again.
first be silent, right?
Yeah.
No. Again, it's a rather like simple idea, but it holds some quite, yeah, it activates a lot
I
of
feel
stuff,
like we
right?
must be
Yeah.
in a crisis when we're
Yeah.
just like, let's think about rest,
Let's think about rest
silence.
and silence. Exactly. It's like, okay, we're opting out.